The Elder Scrolls 4. Oblivion came out in 2006 and gave us some of the most memorable characters in the entire franchise. But what actually happened to them after the credits rolled? Some died, some ascended, some are still out there centuries later doing things we never expected. Let's start with the man who went from anonymous priest to literal dragon god in about 3 weeks. Martin Septim. Martin Septim went from anonymous priest to literal dragon god in about 3 weeks. That's not an exaggeration. The entire Oblivion crisis, from the assassination of Emperor Uriel Septim to the moment Mehrunes Dagon physically steps into the Imperial City, takes place over a matter of weeks. And in that window, a guy who didn't even know he was royalty became the single most important person on the continent. Here's the setup. Martin is the illegitimate son of Emperor Uriel Septim VII, living in Kvatch as a humble priest of Akatosh. He has zero idea about his bloodline. None. He's just a guy who likes incense and prayer beads. Then the mythic Dawn assassinates every known Septim heir in a single night. Oblivion gates start ripping open across Cyrodiil, and suddenly this random priest is the last person alive who can light the dragon fires and save reality from collapsing. So the Blades grab him from Kvatch, haul him to Cloud Ruler Temple, and hand him the Mysterium Xarxes, a book written by a Daedric prince. Martin, the priest, deciphers it. He then rallies the Counts of Cyrodiil to defend Bruma from the largest coordinated Daedric assault of the war. He effectively acts as emperor without ever being crowned. The man speedran character development. But here's where it ends. Mehrunes Dagon, a literal Daedric prince, physically manifests in the Imperial City, hundreds of feet tall, walking through buildings. Martin makes a choice. He shatters the Amulet of Kings, channels his dragon blood, and transforms into a colossal fiery avatar of Akatosh, a golden dragon the size of a cathedral. He wrestles Dagon in full view of the city, forces the prince back into oblivion, and permanently seals the barrier between realms. Then he turns to stone. The massive dragon statue in the Temple of the One? That's Martin. That's his body, frozen mid-roar. The Septim dynasty ends right there. The Third Era ends right there. No coronation, no legacy, no children. Just a rock shaped like a miracle. And here's the part that actually stings. That statue, the only physical proof Martin Septim ever existed, was almost certainly destroyed during the Great War. When the Aldmeri Dominion sacked the Imperial City in 4E 171, the Thalmor occupied the capital and systematically dismantled symbols of human divine power. A giant stone dragon representing Akatosh's intervention on behalf of mankind? That's target number 1. Unlike Tiber Septim, who becomes the god Talos and gets worshipped for centuries, Martin receives nothing. No cult, no divine ascension, no ongoing worship. He saved every living thing on Nirn and the world just moved on. His legacy is a line in a history book and a statue that probably got smashed by elves who hated everything he represented, which is, not ideal. But if Martin's sacrifice feels tragic, wait until you hear about the guy who made it all necessary in the first place. Mankar Camoran. Mankar Camoran built an entire religion around the idea that he was right about everything. And honestly, you have to respect the commitment even if the guy was completely, catastrophically wrong. Here's the setup. Mankar wrote the commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, 4 volumes of dense pseudo-philosophical scripture arguing that Tamriel isn't a world created by the divines. It's a prison realm that rightfully belongs to Mehrunes Dagon. Every temple, every prayer to Akatosh, built on a lie. The Daedra are the real gods, and mortals are just inmates who forgot they're locked up. Now, if this was just some guy ranting on a street corner, nobody would care. But Mankar built the mythic Dawn around it. A cult so organized they successfully assassinated Emperor Uriel Septim VII and every known heir in a single coordinated strike. They stole the Amulet of Kings. They broke the dragon fires. They cracked open the barrier between Oblivion and Mundus, all because one Altmer decided he had the universe figured out, and then he left. Mankar used the Mysterium Xarxes to construct a pocket dimension called Paradise, a lush garden world suspended over lakes of lava, and basically waited for everything to end from the comfort of his personal afterlife, which is, not a great look for a revolutionary. When the hero of Kvatch finally enters Paradise to retrieve the amulet, Mankar is still monologuing, still absolutely convinced he's already won. The hero kills him, kills his children Ruma and Raven, and the moment Mankar dies, Paradise doesn't just lose its ruler, it ceases to exist entirely. That's the detail that tells you everything. His paradise wasn't sustained by Dagon's power or anchored to any Daedric framework. It was held together entirely by his will and the Mysterium Xarxes. The second his heart stopped, his entire reality folded in on itself. For a guy who spent decades preaching that mortality was an illusion, he sure died like a regular person, and he stayed dead. Mankar was a powerful mortal Altmer, but mortal nonetheless. No reforming in Oblivion, no second chance. advances. The irony is that his ideas outlived him by centuries. In Skyrim, 200 years later, Mythic Dawn remnants still circulate his commentaries like holy scripture. His cult survived. His philosophy persists. But the man himself is just gone, permanently. Mancur Cameron talked a bigger game than almost anyone in Elder Scrolls history. He reshaped geopolitics, assassinated an emperor, and built his own dimension. And all it took to undo everything was one adventurer with a sword and the willingness to use it. But if Mancur is the guy who tried to end the world, the next entry is the person who stopped him. And what happened to them afterward is somehow even stranger than building a fake paradise. The hero of Kvatch. No character in Elder Scrolls history has a more absurd resume than this one. A nameless prisoner, rotting in a cell, who somehow ends up becoming a literal god. Not metaphorically, not godlike, an actual Daedric prince. And the craziest part is how casually the series confirms it. Let's start from the bottom. The hero of Kvatch begins Oblivion with nothing. No name, no backstory, no explanation for why they're in prison. Just a convict who happens to be in the wrong cell at the right time when Emperor Uriel Septim needs an escape route. From that single coincidence, this person goes on to become the savior of Bruma, the champion of Cyrodiil, the Divine Crusader, the Grey Fox, and potentially the Archmage and Listener of the Dark Brotherhood. That's not a character arc. That's a hostile takeover of every major institution in Cyrodiil. But the big stuff goes way beyond guild titles. The hero is the central figure in 3 separate world-ending crises. First, the Oblivion Crisis itself, where they recover the Amulet of Kings from Mancur Cameron's paradise and escort Martin to his final sacrifice. Then the Auroran Crisis, where they reassemble Pelinal Whitestrake's relics and destroy Umaril the Unfeathered in both the physical and spiritual realms. That alone would make them one of the most accomplished mortals in history. And then Shivering Isles happened. Here's where it gets genuinely insane. The hero enters the realm of Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, and gets caught up in the Grey March, a cyclical event where the Prince Jiggalag reclaims the Isles from Sheogorath at the end of every era. Turns out, Sheogorath and Jiggalag are the same being, cursed by the other princes into an endless loop of creation and destruction. The hero defeats Jiggalag in direct combat, breaks the ancient curse, frees Jiggalag as his own independent prince, and then inherits the mantle of Sheogorath. Not becomes Sheogorath's champion, becomes Sheogorath, the Prince of Madness, a Daedric prince with dominion over an entire plane of oblivion. The hero's consciousness doesn't just vanish, it merges with the role. Their memories, their identity, all of it gets intertwined with the mantle of madness itself. This is mantling in its purest form. You don't just take the job, you become the job, and Skyrim quietly confirms it. In the quest, The Mind of Madness, the Dragonborn meets Sheogorath inside the mind of Pelagius the Mad, and Sheogorath makes direct references to the Oblivion Crisis. He says he was there. He talks about Martin Septim. He references events that only the hero of Kvatch would have personally witnessed. This is the first time in the series that 2 playable protagonists directly interact with each other. The Dragonborn is literally having a conversation with the player character from the previous game, now wearing the face of a god. The hero of Kvatch doesn't die. They don't retire. They don't fade into obscurity like so many RPG protagonists. They ascend. A random prisoner with 0 identity becomes an immortal Daedric prince ruling the Shivering Isles for eternity, which is, a pretty solid career trajectory for someone who started the game staring at a dungeon wall. But if you think ascending to godhood is the wildest fate an Oblivion character can have, wait until you hear what happened to the Brotherhood's most infamous speaker, Lucien Lachance. Lucien Lachance is the first Dark Brotherhood representative you ever meet. You commit a murder, go to sleep, and wake up to a guy in black handprint armor calmly explaining that you've been watched. Not a job interview, just an assassin in your bedroom at 3 a.m. saying, "Nice kill, want more?" He becomes your handler. As speaker for the Black Hand, he bridges the gap between low-level assassins and the Brotherhood's governing body. He gives orders. You follow them. Simple. Until he orders the purification. Every single member of the Cheydinhal Sanctuary has to die because a traitor supposedly infiltrated their ranks. So you do it. You murder your colleagues because Lucien told you to. Here's where it gets tragic. The traitor was never there. Mathieu Bellamont had been manipulating events the entire time, forging orders and planting evidence to frame Lucien as the mole. Every death during the purification was unnecessary. And now, Lucien's the one wearing the target. The Black Hand corners him at Applewatch Farm. By the time you arrive, it's too late. Lucien is bound, tortured, and executed by his own colleagues. The guy who recruited you dies thinking his brothers believe he's a traitor. You can expose Bellamont afterward, clear Lucien's name posthumously, but he's still dead on a farmhouse floor. His corpse ends up displayed in the Night Mother's crypt, which is, not ideal, but the story doesn't end there. 200 years later in Skyrim, you complete the Dark Brotherhood questline and gain the ability to summon Lucien's ghost as the spectral assassin. He retains his voice, his personality, his dry professionalism. He fights alongside you and acknowledges your authority as listener. In death, he serves more loyally than most do in life. And honestly, that's a better deal than he ever got while breathing. No politics, no black hand paranoia, no forged letters destroying his reputation, just pure, uncomplicated loyalty to the new listener. The guy got framed, tortured, and strung up like a warning sign, and his reward is an eternity of servitude. Sithis has a weird sense of humor. The community has always loved Lucien for exactly this reason. His arc is one of the most complete tragedies in Elder Scrolls history. A loyal servant destroyed by the very paranoia his organization breeds, framed by a man he never suspected, killed by colleagues who couldn't be bothered to verify the evidence before pulling him apart. Every piece of it was avoidable. None of it was avoided. What makes it land is that you were the instrument. You carried out the purification. You killed innocent Brotherhood members on Lucian's orders that were based on fabricated intelligence. And then you watched the man who gave those orders die for crimes he didn't commit. The guilt compounds in both directions. Nobody walks away clean. That's a complete story. A man who lived by blind obedience to the Night Mother died because someone exploited that same blind obedience in others. Poetic in the worst possible way. But if Lucian's fate is tragic because of betrayal from within, wait until you hear about the alchemist, who got a much cleaner, much sadder ending 200 years later. Sindarian. If you played Oblivion and did any amount of alchemy, you probably remember this guy. Sindarian is an Altmer alchemist living in the basement of the Westweald Inn in Skingrad, entirely devoted to studying one thing, Nirnroot, that weird glowing plant that hums near water. Most players stumble into his quest by accident. You pick up a Nirnroot, he gets excited, and suddenly you're gathering up to 100 of these things so he can refine increasingly potent elixirs. Gathering 100 Nirnroot is tedious. Nobody's pretending otherwise. But Sindarian himself is genuinely endearing. He's not trying to save the world. He's not scheming for power. He's just a guy in a basement who really likes a plant, which is, respectable. But here's where his story gets quietly devastating. After the Oblivion Crisis, Sindarian hears about a red glowing subspecies called Crimson Nirnroot growing exclusively in Blackreach. For those who don't know, Blackreach is a massive underground Dwemer cavern beneath Skyrim filled with ancient automatons, bioluminescent mushrooms, and Falmer, blind, violent, and territorial. Sindarian goes there anyway, because of course he does. He sets up a research station inside a Dwemer house in Blackreach, starts cataloging the Crimson Nirnroot, writing everything down in his field journal. Same meticulous approach he had back in Skingrad, same enthusiasm. Just now he's doing it in one of the most lethal environments in all of Tamriel, completely alone, and they kill him. When the Dragonborn arrives in Blackreach roughly 200 years later, they find Sindarian's skeletal remains inside his makeshift laboratory. No dramatic last stand, no heroic sacrifice. Just a dead scientist who pushed too far into dangerous territory and never came back. His field journal sits beside him, half finished. Here's the thing that makes this hit different than most character deaths in the series. If you played Oblivion, if you spent hours hunting those 100 Nirnroot specimens for this weird little elf in a basement, finding his skeleton isn't just environmental storytelling, it's personal. You remember him, you helped him, and now he's bones in a cave, and nobody was there when it happened. His journal becomes the basis for the quest, Return to Your Roots, where you collect 30 Crimson Nirnroot to continue his work. Another alchemist takes his findings and builds on them. It's one of the rare cases where a character's entire life arc is traced across 2 games in a grounded, scholarly way. No gods, no Daedric princes, just a scientist who lived for his work and died for it too. Not all stories need a dramatic conclusion. Sometimes the saddest ones are the quietest. A skeleton in a chair, a journal with no final entry, and a field of glowing red plants that nobody else will ever study with the same love he did. I don't know what to tell you. That's just how it ended for him. But if Sindarian's fate is a quiet gut punch, the next character's story is anything but quiet. Because the Grey Fox's legacy involves stolen Elder Scrolls, erased identities, and a curse that literally rewrites history. The Grey Fox. The Grey Fox is not a person. It's a parasite wearing a hat. Here's the thing. Most Daedric artifacts give you power with a cost. The Grey Cowl of Nocturnal gives you power by eating your entire existence. Emer Derloth stole the cowl from Nocturnal herself, which, bold move. In retaliation, Nocturnal Infernal cursed the thing so that whoever wears it has their identity completely erased from history. Not just hidden, erased. Your name vanishes from records. Your family forgets you exist. You become nobody, replaced entirely by the persona of the Gray Fox. And this curse isn't some vague magical inconvenience, it's retroactive. The moment you put the cowl on, reality rewrites itself so that you were never you, which is, not ideal. By the time of Oblivion, the Gray Fox has existed as a continuous legend for 300 years. Different people wearing the cowl, all consumed by the same identity, all forgotten. The current wearer turns out to be Corvus Umbernox, the Count of Anvil, who has been missing for years. His wife, Malona, doesn't remember him, not because she's angry, not because she moved on, because the curse literally prevents her brain from holding the memory that her husband exists. He could stand in front of her and she'd see a stranger, because of a hat. But here's where it gets genuinely insane. The Thieves' Guild climax involves stealing an Elder Scroll from the Imperial Library. Not to read it, not to sell it, to use its reality-altering properties to retroactively rewrite the curse out of existence. The Gray Fox essentially says, we're going to edit the source code of the universe, and then does exactly that. The ritual works. Corvus gets his name back, his wife remembers him, he walks back into Castle Anvil like nothing happened, and the player inherits the cowl as the new Gray Fox, minus the identity erasure. Happy ending, except the cowl doesn't stay put. In Skyrim era Creation Club content, a Nord named Pulfir Iceblade gets his hands on the thing and immediately makes the worst possible decision with it. Instead of leading his clan, he dons the cowl and goes off pursuing theft and personal glory as the next Gray Fox. While he's gone, his family falls apart. His sister dies. His nephew becomes an orphan, all because Pulfir chose a magic hat over his responsibilities. Eventually, guilt catches up with him. He enlists the Dragonborn to help clean up his mess, and then passes the cowl along, because that's what the cowl does. It gets passed. Think about the chain for a second. Emmer Derloth, Corvus Umbernox, the hero of Kvatch. Pulfir Iceblade, the Dragonborn. 5 confirmed bearers across multiple centuries, and the Gray Fox never dies. Individual people suffer, lose their families, lose their identities, lose years of their lives, but the legend just keeps going. The Gray Fox is functionally immortal, not because any single person is immortal, but because the cowl always finds someone new to wear it, someone who thinks they're clever enough to use it without being used by it. They never are. The persona sustains itself through circulation. It's not a character, it's a role that devours characters. And somewhere out there, the cowl is waiting for bearer number 6. But if a cursed hat that eats identities sounds rough, wait until you meet the Count of Skingrad. He's been hiding something far worse than a stolen cowl for over 50 years. Count Janus Hasseldor. Most vampires in the Elder Scrolls are feral monsters hiding in caves and picking off travelers. Janus Hasseldor is the Count of Skingrad. He runs a prosperous city, maintains infrastructure, keeps citizens safe. He just also happens to feed on prisoners in his basement, which is, not ideal. But by vampire standards, the man is practically a saint. In 3E 383, 50 years before the Oblivion Crisis, Janus and his wife Rona were turned by a clandestine vampire coven called the Order. Janus adapts. He weaponizes the condition for political longevity, using centuries of uninterrupted rule to keep Skingrad stable and thriving. But Rona doesn't adapt. She falls into a near catatonic state, trapped between life and death. Janus spends 50 years trying to cure her. Nothing works. So he keeps her hidden in a secure chamber beneath the castle, preserved in horrible limbo while he governs alone above her. The whole time, he's managing an impossible double life. Outwardly, the reclusive count who governs through his steward. Privately, feeding exclusively on prisoners and outsiders so he never touches a citizen, drawing a moral line where most would have abandoned morality entirely. He even becomes a secret ally of the Mages Guild during the war against Mannimarco, feeding intelligence about necromantic operations to help the good guys win. A vampire actively undermining a necromancer. I don't know what to tell you. The man has layers. Eventually, the player deals with the Order, and Janus makes his request. Kill Rona. Not cruelty. Love. 50 years of watching her suffer in a state he cannot fix. And he finally accepts the only mercy left is ending it. You do it for him. And then he's just alone. A vampire with an empty castle and eternity stretching ahead with nothing to fill it. Now here's where it gets eerie. By Skyrim's era, roughly 200 years later, there is zero mention of Janus Hasseldor. No reference to who rules Skingrad. No books. No rumors. Complete canonical silence. And as a vampire, there is absolutely no reason he couldn't still be alive. He was already over 50 years into vampirism during Oblivion. He'd already survived decades of political upheaval, the simulacrum, and everything else Tamriel threw at him without anyone discovering his secret. The man is nothing if not a survivor. So where is he? Nobody knows. Some speculate he ruled through the Stormcrown Interregnum, keeping Skingrad stable while while Cyrodiil tore itself apart. Others think he found a cure and chose to die naturally, reuniting with Rona in whatever afterlife exists. A few believe he's still out there, governing from the shadows like some kind of undead middle manager filing paperwork at 3 a.m. None of these are confirmed by a single line of text. The silence is conspicuous. Bethesda confirmed fates for far less interesting characters. But the vampire who governed with compassion, loved his wife 50 years beyond her death, and cooperated with the forces of good? Nothing. He exists in permanent uncertainty, which honestly feels appropriate for a man who spent his entire existence between things. Between life and death, between monster and ruler, between love and loss. But if a sympathetic vampire with an ambiguous fate sounds complicated, wait until you meet the necromancer who literally became a god and still managed to die multiple times. Mannimarco. Most villains in this franchise have the decency to die once and stay dead. Mannimarco apparently never got that memo. He's been killed in the Second Era, killed again in the Third Era, and yet somehow still hangs in the sky as a literal celestial body. I don't know what to tell you. The man is simply built different. Here's the thing. Mannimarco started his career as a student of the Sigic Order on Artaeum, studying alongside Vanus Galerian, the guy who would eventually found the Mages Guild. Two classmates, two wildly different career trajectories. Galerian went on to regulate magic and build institutions. Mannimarco went on to raise the dead and start a cult. You know, normal divergence. He got expelled from the Sigics for his necromancy obsession and founded the Worm Cult, an organization dedicated to the idea that death is just a suggestion if you're powerful enough. And for a while, it seemed like he might be right. In the Second Era, around 2E579, Mannimarco sabotaged Emperor Varen's ritual with the Amulet of Kings, triggering the Soul Burst, which basically ripped a hole between Nirn and Oblivion, and let Molag Bal attempt to drag the entire world into Cold Harbor. Cool, that's also a thing that happened. He did this while pretending to be Varen's trusted advisor. The Vestige eventually tracked him down to Heart's Grief and killed him. Dead. Done. Finished. Except no. Because 731 years later, he's back. In the events of Daggerfall, set in 3E4017, one possible outcome of the main quest has Mannimarco using the Totem of Tiber Septim to achieve full apotheosis, becoming the god of worms. And here's where it gets genuinely weird. The Warp in the West, a dragon break that resolved Daggerfall's multiple contradictory endings, made all outcomes simultaneously true. Every faction got what they wanted. Every ending happened. Which means that Mannimarco both achieved godhood and remained mortal at the same time. Both versions exist in official canon, simultaneously. So by the time Oblivion rolls around in 3E433, you've got a mortal Mannimarco threatening the Mages Guild, trying to overthrow it and expand his necromantic empire. The player confronts him in the questline finale and kills him. Again, that's at least death number 2, possibly 3, depending on how you count the ESO timeline, but look up at the sky. The Necromancer's moon, a dark aspect of Masser, sits there as his divine form. Necromancers across Tamriel draw power from it for their soul-trapping rituals. It's referenced in altars, in texts, in the actual game mechanics. The mortal dies, but the god endures. You kill him on the ground and his face is still hanging in orbit, powering every black soul gem some lunatic enchanter fills in a basement somewhere. The community consensus is pretty clean on this one. Mortal Mannimarco is dead, has been dead multiple times, will probably be dead again if Bethesda needs a necromancer villain in the next game. But the divine Mannimarco, the god of worms, the necromancer's moon, exists as a permanent celestial fixture thanks to a timeline glitch that made contradictory realities equally valid. He didn't transcend death through some brilliant scheme or ultimate magical achievement. He transcended death because the universe broke and nobody fixed it. Not all stories have a satisfying conclusion. Sometimes a villain just accidentally becomes eternal because the writers needed 6 endings to all be canon at once, and one of those endings happened to be the necromancer becomes god. And now, he's the moon. Forever. Add that to the list. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.